adding controls or objects to our form, let me point out a few more things about the IDE. The panels, such as the Toolbox, the Solution Explorer, and the Properties, can be resized. I place my cursor on the panel border and I can shrink that panel or expand that panel. There's also some little icons at the top here. I can close the panel by clicking the X at the top right of that panel. And if you accidentally do that, the question is, how do you get it back? We'll go to the View menu. In the View menu, you will see Toolbox. That will bring it back. There's also a little push pin here, which is Auto Hide. If I click that, the Toolbox collapses and is over here on the left-hand side. And that's if you need some more real estate space. If you're working on a small monitor, or you have a really large project, you're doing 1920 by 1080 and need a much larger editor window, that can come in handy. To bring it back, just simply click on Toolbox and make it stay. You can actually select a tool and put that tool or put that control on your form. If you want the Toolbox to stay open, just push the little push pin and that will lock it in place. So same thing over on the Solution Explorer, we can resize these panels. These are also dockable. So right now I have the Solution Explorer and the Properties docked on top of one another on the right hand side. All of these can be floating, and you can get to the floating panels by clicking the little drop down arrow here and choose Float, or you can just pull the panel. I'm going to go down to Properties. I'm going to grab where it says Properties at the top, or basically what we might consider the title bar of that panel, and just pull it away. And now it's a floating panel, and I can position it anywhere I want on my screen. To dock it back in place below the Solution Explorer, I'm going to drag it over here to the right-hand side, and then with these little controls here in the center, I can choose where I want to have this docked. I'm going to put it at the bottom, and it's docked back in place. Maybe I want to have this docked over here on the left. And again, I can resize these panels accordingly. I'm going to reposition my Properties panel back down below here. Now again, what if I happen to close my Properties panel? Well, again, if we go to the View menu, you will see the Properties window. Notice you can also use Control WP to bring that back. So if I close it, I can do a Control W for window and follow that with P, and that will bring it back. This bottom area down here is used for when we're running this. It'll show errors. As we're writing code, it'll show errors. There's also various things that can be displayed here. We'll customize this as we get into our projects. One other thing to point out, the Solution Explorer is also docked with the Team Explorer, and I can click on that tab. We're not going to use the Team Explorer in this course, but just be aware that it's there. In fact, we could take the Team Explorer and simply close it, and we'll have everything we need here. When you get your windows set up, you can go to the Window menu and choose Save Window Layout. And I'm just going to name this Stephen Default. And now if I move things around, and I want to go back to that, maybe I bring my Toolbox and I parked it over here. I want to get back to that layout that I had. I can go to Window, Apply Window Layout, and choose my saved layout. Say OK, and I'm back to where I started. One more thing I want to point out here is under Tools, there are options for customizing everything here, colors, fonts, so forth. The one I'm going to point out at this point is the theme, the color theme. Right now mine is set to light. That's what I've traditionally used. There is a dark layout. And if I choose dark and click OK, you're going to see it go to a black layout. Some students like to use that. It might be handy maybe at night when you're working in dim light. I, however, find this much harder to read, so I really never use the dark layout, again, unless I'm having some eye strain or something at night. I'm going to go back to Tools, Options. There's another one that's actually the most popular one according to surveys of developers, and that's the blue. It's going to be very similar to the light. It gives you bluer frames on your projects. Like I said, that's very popular. I'm going to go back to Tools, Options, and choose the light. There's a blue extra contrast for those who have some sight issues. I'm going to say OK, and we'll be back to where we started. All right, so let's begin to build our project. As we get started, I'm going to change the size of my form once again. I think probably 600, 400 is going to be about the right size according to my storyboard that I've sketched out. We can always change this as we go and as we need to. So one of the first things we're going to add here is a label. So in the toolbox, we have common controls, and most of the controls we work with will be in these common controls. We have a few others that we'll work with down the road in containers and menus and toolbars and components and dialogues. You can also view all the Windows forms, but then it gives you everything alphabetically, and some things will be pretty far down the list as we want to get them. So I'm going to choose common controls. I'm going to take the label and drag it over to my form. So I'm dragging it from the toolbox to the form, just grabbing it and dragging it. I'm going to delete that label and show you another way to do this. I'm going to choose the label and I'm going to create a box and give it the boundaries that I want for that label. Now here's the problem with labels and drawing the boundaries, which is usually my preferred method. But notice the boundary here, the little dotted line, is very small. And that's because of a property in the labels. My label is selected, and I can tell that by the little white box in the upper left-hand corner. That box is called a handle. If I click on the form, I get a handle on the bottom right-hand corner and on the right side and at the bottom. And the properties are going to change based on which object I have selected. I'm going to pull my properties panel off and have it be floating, and that way you can kind of see it over here next to my form. Right now I'm seeing the properties for the label, and the label is of the class system.windows.forms.label. If I click the form, I'm now looking at the properties for the form. So I can only see the properties for one item at a time, although I can select multiple items and see the common properties for those items. Okay, I'm going to go back to the label. So I mentioned one of the properties that is set automatically when we create a label that doesn't allow it to have the size that I dictated is the auto size property, and by default that is set to true. So I'm going to change that value, and in this case, rather than highlighting true and typing false, I can just click on it and choose the drop-down list and choose false. And now I see that border that I set up. So one of the properties that we want for the label is to display some text in it, and that's going to be in our text property. And our text is going to be enter values in the two text boxes. And by the way, you can click the little drop down arrow here and gives you a much larger window to type things into. So we want to do enter values in the two text boxes labeled first number and second number. And then click a button between them for the desired operation. And a period there. I'm just going to click on another property somewhere in the properties window that will apply it, and we see the text appear in our label. Now I'm going to modify this a little bit. I'm going to go back and add instructions, all uppercase, at the very beginning of that line. And I can resize that label as I need to by grabbing the handles now. I'm just going to shrink that up a little bit. The next thing I want is another label. So I'm going to drag another label from the toolbox to my form. And the text property for this label is going to be first number, 2 words. I'm going to take that label, I'm going to copy it using Control-C. So I've got it selected. I can do Control-C, C for copy, or I can go to the Edit menu and choose Copy, either way. I'm going to paste, Control-V, or Edit menu, paste, and position this label in place to the right of the first number label. I'm going to change the text property of this one to be second number. I'm going to paste again, click on my form, Control-V, and this fourth label, I'm going to change the text to solution. Next, I'm going to add a text box. So in the toolbox, I'm going to find the text box control, and I'm going to drag it to underneath first number. And I'm going to give it a value of 12 for the text. Now when I'm using numbers in text box, I like to have them aligned to the right. So underneath the text property is a text align property, and a little drop down arrow. I'm going to choose right, changing it from left to right. Now that text is a little bit small for me. I want it to be bigger and a little bit bolder, so I'm going to go to the font property for this text box. And the font property, notice, has a little plus sign on the left hand side, so it has several different properties associated with that property. But the easiest thing to do here is click this little button with the 3 ellipses, the 3 periods. Anytime you see 3 periods together, whether it's here or whether it's on a menu item, that means it's going to bring up a dialog box. That is standard in every Windows application, and also on a Macintosh as well, or even on a Linux box. So it's a programming standard. So visually, the 3 periods or 3 ellipses means it's going to open dialog. So click it, I get the font dialog, and here I can change it. Here I can change the font. I'm going to change to bold. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, maybe 16 points. Let's go 18 points. That's about what I want. And I'm going to say OK. Now I also want to name this text box, so we're going to refer to it in code. So I'm going to scroll up with that text box still selected, and we're going to name this one txt first num. Now again, I start text boxes with a lowercase txt, then I capitalize each of the words after that. There can be no spaces in the names. So it's txt, capital F first, capital N num. This is called camel casing, and just makes it more readable than if I type this in all as lowercase. They kind of run together. So by capitalizing the first letter of each subsequent word of a name, just makes it a little more easier to read. So txt first num is going to be the name. Now I'm going to select that text box, copy it, and paste it, and put this one underneath our second number label. And I'm going to change the name, txt second num, capitalizing the S and the N, all one word. And then I'm going to go down to the text property, and let's change that 12 to the number 5. Okay, I want another label after that. So after our second number text box, or txt second number, I'm not going to name this label because it doesn't need a name, but I'm going to change the text here to an equal sign. And I want to make the font much bigger so we can see it. I'm going to make it even a little bit larger than 18. Let's go 24 point bold. There, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to kind of drag it up and position it in place. And now I want another label for our solution. I'm going to drag the size of this label out to be a little bit wider than our 2 text boxes were. And just for reference, I'm going to put a number in here. Let's put in 17. Again, I'm going to change the alignment of this, the text align, and for label it's a little bit different. We don't have just a left, right, and center. Sorry, that was my Rottweiler barking. But we have 9 different areas. I'm going to put this in the center right, or we call it middle right. Once again, I'm going to set the auto size to false. And I want this to look like the other text boxes. So we can manipulate this a little bit to have that appearance. I'm going to set a background style of fixed single. I'm going to set the background color or back color to be white. And here I have 3 different tabs: Custom, Web, and System. I'm going to go to the Custom tab and click the white color. And let's change the font. We'll go back to our 18 bold. Now that looks just like a text box. The thing is, the user cannot type into that text box. This one we're going to refer to in code. So I'm going to set the name. And our Hungarian notation for labels is LBL. So labels start the name with the letters LBL. And I'm just going to call this LBL solution with a capital S. Okay, we're almost there. Now I need some buttons for my 4 operators. So we're going to take a button tool. I'm going to create a button, dragging it onto the form. I'm going to name this button BTN add. So BTN is the Hungarian notation for a button. Add with a capital A, no spaces. I'm going to set the text of this button to be plus, be a plus sign. The text alignment's automatically middle center, that's what I want. But I'm going to change the font, and again I want to make this bold and big. We're going to go 24 bold. So there then is my button. You can resize it as you need to, position it. I'm going to copy that button and paste. Put it below the plus. We're going to change this one to BTN subtract. And I'm going to change the text to be a minus sign or a hyphen. I'm going to paste again, position it below those 2 buttons, name this one BTN multiply, and I'll change the text to an X. Paste one more button. This will be our BTN divide button, so let's name it that way. BTN divide with a capital D. And we'll change the text to be a slash. There is our interface. At this point, it's a good idea to save your project. So a rule on saving: when you go to File, always choose Save All. Never choose Save Form1.cs as, because it gives you a chance to rename that file or to put it in a different location. And either one will cause problems without doing some other things. And if you put it in a different location, now when you go to zip your project together, that file will not be in that project. It might be in another folder, and I can't open your project to grade it. I wish there was a way to get rid of these 2 items off the menu. Just ignore them and always choose Save All. Now I'm going to start my project. So on the button bar, in the middle is this little green arrow with the word Start. This allows me to test my project, and it goes through a process of compiling where it takes all of our source files and produces a binary executable file which we can distribute to other people. I'm going to click Start. You're going to see the IDE kind of gray out a little bit, and here then is my project running, and I have 12 and 5. I could change this. I can make this 10. I can make this 6, but I can't change the solution. I can click on these buttons, but they don't do anything. So we need to code these buttons to make them functional. I'm going to close my executable by clicking the red X, or you can also click the red square up here in the button bar to say stop debugging. Either way, the IDE is going to come back. And so in the next video, we're going to code the buttons to make this functional.